Hello everyone, welcome back to the Anatomy Lab. Today we are going to be taking a look at the forearm, the wrist, the hand, and the fingers. So, to be clear, when we say forearm, let's also remember that we are talking about specifically between the elbow and the wrist. So, what we're going to be focusing on first are these two bones that we have here in the forearm, which are going to include the radius and the ulna. So we'll wait on the hand, but really quickly we can use the hand to help with orienting ourselves to the bones in the forearm, as in, where do you find these two bones in the forearm? So remember that when we are in anatomical position, we have the thumb that's pointed laterally, and then we have the pinky that's pointed medially. So in our forearm, we have the radius, which will be more lateral on the side of the thumb, and then we'll have the ulna, which will be more medial on the side of the pinky. So that's the relative position to each other, and it's going to be very important that you kind of understand that as we look at other structures in the body later on. But for now, at the very least, if you look at the thumb, you'll know that this is the radius, and if this is the pinky, you'll know that this is the ulna. So we'll wait to take a look at this a little later. But for now, let's get started with looking at this bone, the radius. So for any bone, really, you need to ask yourself, how do you know that this is the radius or whatever bone it might be? So what you want to look for are unique characteristics to this bone, which number one, like the thing that I usually ask myself first of all is, does it have a ball end? If it does, it's either the humerus or the femur, but in this case, we definitely don't. So that means that it's not the humerus or the radius, or the humerus or the femur, but what else might it have? Like, what other unique kind of characteristics or shapes do you look for? So in the case of the radius, what I will look for is this kind of knob shape. So this is actually called the head of the radius, and this is actually a pretty unique thing that you find on not very many bones. So here you have this very circular structure, and then furthermore, it's going to kind of narrow out, like as it gets down to this region called the neck of the humerus. So with the head of the humerus and the neck of the humerus, it kind of looks like a tiny little doorknob. If I can find that doorknob, I'll know that this is the radius. And furthermore, I know that I have that head of the radius as well as that neck of the radius. Now, something that is not super easily seen is that you have this depression on the top of the head of the radius, though. Like at the very proximal most end of the radius, you have this very small little depression of the head of the radius. This is what's going to allow it to articulate with the humerus, specifically on the capitulum. So notice that you have a very small depression, you have a kind of very small bulge. These two are going to fit together. So remember, for bones, you really want these bones to fit together as best they can, otherwise it's going to hurt. So whenever you can, try to fit these shapes together. In this case, you have small depression, small bulge. Those are going to be what articulate with each other. Now furthermore, also on the proximal side of the radius, you have this kind of raised bumpy region. This raised bumpy region is called the radial tuberosity. And once again, tuberosity is something that we learned before, which is a raised bumpy region. So based off of its shape and structure, you can sort of at least a little bit determine what this might be. So radial tuberosity. Now, further down though, as we can see, on the distal end there are some specific regions as well. Those are going to include this large kind of bowl, this larger, more bulky region. But on this bulky region there are two specific landmarks. This part is going to be called the styloid process of the radius. And notice I said of the radius because you have other styloid processes as well. So this specifically is the styloid process of the radius, and you need to say of the radius. But notice on the other side of the distal end, you have this kind of depression here. This depression opposite to the styloid process is going to be the ulnar notch. So what's allowing the ulna to kind of fit next to the radius is going to be this ulnar notch, also on the distal side of the radius. So at the very least, make sure that you can identify this as a radius, know what kind of characteristics to look for, as well as be able to identify specific landmarks. Now, in addition to the radius, you also have the ulna in your forearm. So your ulna is also going to have its own specific landmarks, and once again, you also want to look for some unique characteristics to identify it as the ulna itself. So luckily, the ulna actually has one of the most unique and the most kind of simplest ways to remember it. It has this U shape. So this U shape, this large hook right here, this is going to be the proximal end of the ulna. And being U-shaped, it very luckily gives you a very simple way to remember like its name. Look for the U shape. This is the ulna. So starts with a U, looks for the U, like that would be the ulna. So unfortunately the U shape has some specific names to it. This right here would be called the trochlear notch. Like this large broad U shape is actually the trochlear notch. And if trochlea sounds familiar, it's because that's something that you find on the humerus. So you have the trochlea and the trochlear notch, which will once again fit together quite well. Like you really want these structures to fit together, otherwise your bones won't be able to act very effectively. So trochlea fits with the trochlear notch right here. And furthermore, these two are also going to be associated to names on the humerus as well. So the anterior and inferior portion, this is going to be called the coronoid process. So coronoid process, this is going to be the anterior and inferior region. And then this part with the large kind of bulky region on the back, this is going to be called the Olacranon process as well. So Olacranon might sound familiar because we learned that in regional terminology. This is the posterior elbow. This is essentially like the tip of your elbow. So let's take a look at how that fits really quickly between itself and the humerus. So fit the trochlea and the trochlear notch. And then if you bend your elbow, you'll see that the coronoid process fits into the coronoid fossa. So on the anterior side, coronoid process, coronoid fossa. But on the posterior side, the Olacranon process will fit into the Olacranon fossa. So the bigger of the parts, the Olacranon, is going to fit into the Olacranon fossa. And furthermore, if you bend your elbow and try to put this onto a table, as in like put your elbow down onto a surface, this is your elbow. Like the point of your elbow is literally your Olacranon. Your Olacranon process, this kind of portion of your ulna. So feel your elbow right now. Bend your elbow and feel it. Like that is going to be the Olacranon at the bottom of or at the proximal end of your ulna. So you have all of these different parts that we looked at right now, but besides that, you also have a couple other landmarks, such as this region right here, this kind of bumpy region, raised region. This is the ulnar tuberosity. And furthermore, you have this kind of curve right here that is going to be on the lateral side of the ulna. This is going to be the radial notch that articulates with the radius. But lastly, on the very distal end, you have a small little point in projection, which if you guessed, this is the styloid process of the ulna. So these are your forearm bones, but remember, your forearm bones are then going to be articulating with your hand and wrist, and it is going to be on the thumb side with the radius and the pinky side with the ulna. But when you get down to the wrist, what bones do we have? So in the wrist, we have a group of bones called the carpal bones. And luckily, that is what we're going to learn it as. These are the carpal bones. So carpal bones are going to be the bones of the wrist, and they will lead to bones called the metacarpals. So these bones, the metacarpals, are going to be the bones like going through your hand. So in your palm, that's where you have your metacarpal bones. And your metacarpal bones will be numbered based off of what finger they go to. So in your hand, you have 5 fingers. You have 1 your thumb, 2 your index, 3 your middle, 4 your ring, and then 5 your pinky. So these will be named or numbered thusly: metacarpal 1, metacarpal 2, 3, 4, and 5. So make sure that you number the metacarpals as well, depending on which finger they go to. And that will be applicable to the fingers of the hand as well, which are called phalanges of the hand. So I said phalanges of the hand because you have like digits that look like this in your foot as well, but you definitely don't want your toes to be on your hand. So you should be indicating phalanges of the hand. Now furthermore, phalanges is the plural form, while phalanx will be the singular form. So phalanges collectively, these would be like all of your digits, but this bone in particular would be a phalanx. Furthermore, like your phalanges will have specific kind of increments depending on what part of the finger they're in. So notice that when you look at your hand, your fingers will have these little segments. Each segment will have one of the phalanges, and those phalanges will be named specifically as well. So for fingers 2 through 5, you'll actually have 3 segments, as in like 1, 2, and 3. But in your thumb, you'll only have 2. Like they'll be named a little bit differently. So here we have 3 phalanges. We have proximal phalanx 2, middle phalanx 2, distal phalanx 2. And that will be applicable for any of the phalanges of your fore or index to pinky. Let's say proximal phalanx 4, middle phalanx 4, distal phalanx 4. But in the case of the thumb, you only have 2. The middle one will be missing, so you have proximal phalanx 1 and then middle phalanx 1. And with that said, I think that's about it for the hand, the wrist, fingers, and forearms. Make sure that you can identify all of the landmarks specifically, and make sure that you can identify all of the phalanges specifically. But I think that's about it for this video. Thank you for listening. Good luck with your studying, and I'll see you all next time.